Hi, everyone. Welcome to Advanced Studio Classroom's The Art of English. I'm Peter.
And I'm Linda, and we are so happy to present this month's novel. It's The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Yes, and this is actually this year, 2025, is the 100th anniversary, the centennial of The Great Gatsby. It was originally published in 1925.
Yes, and it's a good contender for the Great American Novel. We encountered earlier this year another American novel, Moby Dick, which also can be considered a great American novel, which is much thicker than The Great Gatsby.
Moby Dick is like 4 Great Gatsbys, maybe even 5.
But there's so much packed into The Great Gatsby, even though it is much thinner.
Yes, indeed.
So many different themes and things about the U.S. that make it American, very like American themes.
Right, because when we talk about the great American novel or the great novel of any country, it's not necessarily a novel, or rather it's not just a novel written by an American author or the author of whatever country. It's also a novel that really shows you something about that country, about its culture, about its attitudes, its people, and so on.
Yes, is reflective of the American culture. And to give you some background of the novel, it's published in 1925, so it's written during the 1920s. And
right, the so-called Roaring Twenties.
Yes.
It was a time of great economic prosperity. I mean, it was comparable really to the 1990s, if that orients any of you, in that it was a time of the Great War. World War I had ended in 1918, and so there was this prosperity, at least in America, that often follows a great war of some kind.
Right.
And just everyone, the standard of living rose, the rich were getting richer, and it all,
people,
of course, came to a dramatic end in 1929.
When
at
the
the end
Great
of the
Depression
decade,
hit.
when the Great Depression hit after the stock market crash. But Fitzgerald is writing before that. He's writing right in the middle of it when things are just going great.
Yes, where people are getting richer, and it's a time of excess. And in particular, we see this with the main character, Gatsby, this conspicuous consumption. So if you are rich, you want to show that you're rich, especially if you are new money, that you've gotten rich in this period or recently. And Gatsby is one of those people. And so he wants to show everyone that he is rich. And so he drives a lavish car, which we'll read about in our passage. And he lives in a big house. And he throws these amazing parties.
Right. And they're right outside of New York City. They're like in the suburb area of New York City at the time. And so it's a very popular place, a very fashionable place. And Gatsby's parties, at least during the summer that they take place in the book, are very fashionable places to be at and to be seen at.
Yes. So all the fashionable people come to these parties. Yes, they want to be seen and they want to see the other people that are there. And our narrator is Nick Carraway, and he is a guy from the Midwest, and he gives us a more neutral perspective.
Right,
At the beginning, he isn't yet caught up in all of this excess, but he's surrounded by it. His friends and his family are part of this New York society.
Right. So he himself, he has a good job in finance, in working for a financial firm in the city, but he's not wealthy like so many of the people that he hangs around with in the novel and gets involved with. But why don't we go ahead and read our excerpt for you if you have your magazines open to the Art of English feature for the month of August. And you can read along the excerpt with us, and then we will go through those 3 discussion questions we have, help you unpack the novel a bit, unpack the writing a bit, unpack the English a bit.
So this is taken from Chapter 4 of The Great Gatsby. At 9 o'clock one morning late in July, Gatsby's gorgeous car lurched up the rocky drive to my door and gave a burst of melody from his 3-noted horn. It was the first time he had called on me, though I had gone to 2 of his parties. mounted in his hydroplane, and at his urgent invitation, made frequent use of his beach.
Good morning, old sport. You're having lunch with me today, and I thought we'd ride up together.
He was balancing himself on the dashboard of his car with that resourcefulness of movement that is so peculiarly American. That comes, I suppose, with the absence of lifting work in youth, and even more, with the formless grace of our nervous, sporadic games. This quality was continually breaking through his punctilious manner in the shape of restlessness. He was never quite still. There was always a tapping foot somewhere, or the impatient opening and closing of a hand. He saw me looking with admiration at his car.
It's pretty, isn't it, old sport?
He jumped off to give me a better view.
Haven't you ever seen it before?
I'd seen it. Everybody had seen it. It was a rich cream color, bright with nickel, swollen here and there in its monstrous length with triumphant hat boxes and supper boxes and toolboxes, and terraced with a labyrinth of windshields that mirrored a dozen suns. Sitting down behind many layers of glass, in a sort of green leather conservatory, we started to town.
Okay, and you'll have to excuse me for chuckling a bit there at the end, but that description that Fitzgerald gives, and, the narrator gives, of the car, of Gatsby's car, is just so wonderfully satirical. It is the way he describes what is just a car, just a way to get from one place to another by driving. He describes it as, it was a rich cream color, bright with nickel, meaning nickel doesn't really have a color. It's a metal that's used, and it gives it a sort of brightness.
Oh, it's shiny.
A shininess, yes. Right, like chrome. Swollen here and there in its monstrous length with triumphant hat boxes, supper boxes, and tool boxes. Those are actual boxes. If you look at the little drawing of a car that's there on your on the page here, the place between the wheels on that side would be often in those days would have actual boxes in them, which would carry food, or which would carry things you'd bought, or tools to fix the car, right on the outside sort of running board there of the car, which made the car seem even bigger than it does in the drawing. And then he really goes into the stratosphere here. The car was terraced with a labyrinth of windshields that mirrored a dozen suns. We're still just talking about a car here, but windshields, by the way, is what they used to call simply windows. We think now in 2025, we think of the windshield as the big window in the front of the car that you look out when you're driving. But here, windshield just meant any of the windows on the car on any side of it. So he describes this labyrinth, a labyrinth, that's like a maze or a puzzle that you're lost in, like inside one of the great pyramids of Egypt, and he's got a labyrinth of windshields on this car mirroring a dozen suns, and then sitting down behind many layers of glass in a sort of green leather conservatory. A conservatory is like a very nice room in a very nice house with very nice furniture, and it's very quiet, and there's books on the shelves, and there's maybe a sifter of brandy on a table and a nice rug, and maybe there's a fire burning in the fireplace. And he's saying this car was so big and luxurious that it was like being in one of those, in a conservatory of a big, wealthy house of some sort.
Yeah, it really does seem over the top.
It's so over the top.
This car is, and that's to represent his wealth and his extravagance, like the lengths that he's going to present himself as this rich, important person.
Right, and the lengths Fitzgerald is going to kind of poke fun at him and, kind of comment on this appetite for excess that people had so often in those days. And, if we look around us sometimes even now today.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, there will always be people like that. But back then, this was the thing to do. Like you wanted to show off your wealth. You didn't want to keep it hidden. And especially for the nouveau riche, the new money, they especially wanted to do this because they didn't come from old money. So people didn't know that they were rich, so they had to display it. And the last description of the car, of them in a conservatory, I think of them as on display. Like they're on display in this car, like behind all of these windchills or this glass for everyone to look at and admire them as they go into town.
Right. So in a way that we've kind of preempted question number one here. What words does Nick use to describe Gatsby and to describe his car? We kind of got into that already. So let's look at what words does Nick use to describe Gatsby.
Yeah, he describes him as, peculiarly American. And that's coming from the movements that he's making. He says that Gatsby's very fidgety. Like he's always moving. Like there's always a tapping foot or a hand being opened or closed. So Gatsby has this restlessness. He can't keep still.
Right, and that's very much a quality of the American character, has always been a restlessness, an inability to be satisfied. And sometimes that can lead to good things. Sometimes it can lead you to, go to a new world, a new country, as the original settlers of America did, coming from Europe and fleeing from Europe. And, sort of a restlessness drove them from Europe, a dissatisfaction with their lives and the system of government in Europe drove them to America. But that restlessness can also lead to excess, as we see here in specifically the example of the car, but also excess and a sort of rootlessness, a inability to commit to things, an inability to realize that the party comes to an end at some point and you have to carry on with normal life. That restlessness can lead to behavior that is perhaps not so wise.
Right, but you also need that restlessness to achieve the American dream, which in everyone's eyes, in society's eyes, Gatsby has achieved the American dream. He has come from nothing, from poverty, to build himself up, to create all this wealth so that he can afford all of these luxuries. And in order to achieve that, you have to have this drive. You have to know how to hustle, to know how to make money, because that's what it requires.
Exactly, yes. And as you'll see if you read the book, that there are eventually questions that arise as to just how Gatsby did make his money and what maybe be behind that. So that's something to kind of whet your appetite to read the book if you haven't actually read it in terms of the plot, in terms of what happens.
Right. But the image of Gatsby is this enigmatic character. We don't know off the bat, we don't know immediately where his money comes from. He wants to keep that as a mystery because it's not something to really be proud of, but he wants to present himself as this gentleman, as this great guy. And he uses this term old sport. He uses it a lot with Nick. We see it several times here, calling him old sport. So he's trying to adapt or to have this certain way of speaking to elevate his status.
Right. Again, the idea of the American dream of reinventing yourself. There's two American dreams that we sort of know about generally in the world. The American dream of starting with nothing and working your way to the top and becoming rich, but also the American dream of reinventing yourself, of starting out in life as one kind of person from a particular family or a particular culture and going to America and becoming someone totally different. Even inside America, this dream of reinventing yourself, reinvention, is strong. It's perhaps not by accident that the novel takes place in New York City, which in its size, in its glamour, has always been a place in America where other Americans will come to reinvent themselves. Maybe they grew up in a small town somewhere, but they always had a dream for something more. They had that American restlessness, and so they come to a place like New York City and they reinvent themselves.
They
They're
can
no
become
longer
who they want to be.
Yeah. If they have the talent, if they have the skill, if they have the luck, or if they have the money. But there is that theme also, this idea of the American dream of reinvention, and that's very much a theme in Gatsby that is explored in the book, The Great Gatsby.
So how about we move on to question 2?
Yeah.
What do we learn about the narrator's relationship with Gatsby? So our narrator is Nick Carraway, as we mentioned before, and he is a more, down-to-earth guy.
Yeah, compared to the other people in the novel, he's a bit more down to earth. He's, basically middle class. A lot of the people he's with are upper class. Some of them are old money, meaning they inherited their money, and their parents probably inherited their money. Their family's been wealthy for a long time. And others, like Linda was saying, are nouveau riche. They're the first generation to be wealthy, and they've done it themselves.
And Nick probably didn't grow up poor. He is a cousin of Daisy, and she's quite wealthy, or at least her husband is. But he is not really wealthy. Nick isn't. And he's renting this modest cottage, but he's the neighbor of Gatsby. Yeah. So Gatsby lives in this big mansion, but Nick, his neighbor, lives in, probably today would be a pool house or something of that sort.
Probably quite a nice house, but nothing compared to this huge mansion right next door that Gatsby lives in. And in terms of the narrator's relationship with Gatsby, there's a detail here that is another example of Fitzgerald's terrific writing. Right there in the second paragraph, Nick says it was the first time he had called on me, meaning it was not the first time he had spoken or even used the telephone. It was the first time he had come to my house. It was the first time he had called on me, though I had already gone to 2 of his parties, mounted in his hydroplane, and at his urgent invitation made frequent use of his beach. Gatsby's house is so big, and they're in, again, outside of New York City on what's called Long Island, and there's a lot of beachfront property out there, and this house is right by the beach. So Gatsby not only has this great car, this great house, he also has beachfront property, and he has invited previously, before this moment, he's invited Nick to to make frequent use of his beach, as it said. But look at that word, at his urgent invitation. Very subtle, but you almost miss it. But it'd be one thing just to invite someone to use the beach. Come by anytime, use the beach. But apparently, Gatsby urgently invited Nick to use the beach. You can, just imagine him saying, you really ought to come see the beach sometime. You ought to come by and see the beach, It's just a single word, but it does indicate something about it. It doesn't spell it out completely here, but it does indicate something about Nick and Gatsby's relationship, that Nick is important to Gatsby in some way. Yeah, so he didn't just invite him to his beach, he urgently invited him to his beach.
Right. And they've already interacted. They're very familiar with one another. And Gatsby really wants to solidify this relationship with Nick because Nick is cousins with the woman that Gatsby is in love with.
Right. Bit of a spoiler here, but nevertheless, that is part of their relationship.
I mean, I think once you start reading the novel, that's pretty upfront. Gatsby is in love with Daisy, Nick's cousin. And so Nick is a way to get closer to Daisy. So he will probably, be inviting him in an urgent manner so that the relationship can progress.
Yeah. Well, let's touch briefly, we're almost out of time, but let's touch briefly on question number 3 here. What qualities, in your experience, are peculiarly American, as it says in the book? And just to be clear here, peculiar, we tend to use in our day and age peculiar to mean strange or different from the norm in some way. What a peculiar haircut he's got. It's all odd and everything. But the older meaning of peculiar is more like our word specific. Something that is specifically American or peculiarly American doesn't mean just strange American. Or odd. Yeah, typically, exactly. Yeah. So what qualities in your experience, Linda, are peculiarly American?
Well, it's hard to say because we're American, so we have to take a step back. But being abroad and observing other Americans, I can see more what's, I guess, stereotypically American, which can be negative. I just actually had an experience over the weekend. I was at an event and a friend who is also American wanted to invite his colleagues. Like he works at an American organization. And I was like, oh, sure. Yeah, we'll just book another table for you guys. And they ended up being like so stereotypically American, loud and kind of arrogant and just so like not really caring about the people around them and how their actions affected other people. I mean, they weren't doing it intentionally, but that's just, my other friend and I who also is American, we're just saying, oh, they were just like so American,
Yeah.
And that's like the negative image that Americans have, but some cases it's true.
Yeah, no, there's certainly in America in this day and age a sense of entitlement that often comes with Americans. Like we're Americans, our country is the biggest country and strongest country in the world, and that means we can behave however we want to behave and throw money around and not really care about people. And you'll be surprised to see how much that characteristic shows up in The Great Gatsby as well, 100 years ago. For me, we're just winding down here, but for me, I think a peculiarly American quality is captured right here. Another tiny little detail, but in that very first paragraph, Gatsby comes up to Nick's house in this gorgeous car and gave out a burst of melody from its three-noted horn. So that means the horn on this car doesn't just go, it goes, or something. It's a three musical notes. And I'm thinking of these cars that I've seen in America that, when you press the horn, they hum out a little tune like, and that's the horn. And you hear the car driving around the neighborhood, and every now and then, which is the beginning of an old American folk song called Dixie about the American South. But it's a car horn.
Yeah.
All it has to do is just go, but no. This is an American car. I'm an American. I want, or, I want notes. I want a little melody just when I hit my car horn.
So that everyone knows that you have arrived. You have to make an entrance and let everyone know.
That is a peculiarly American character, I think, and you'll find it and more in the book, The Great Gatsby. If you want to learn about America and kind of see one of the great American writers stick it to America, give it a critical examination of American characteristics. This is the book. And again, just great writing.
It's
just
a great
terrific
novel,
writing.
yes.
Yeah. Wonderful use of English, very concise, says a lot with very few words. But I think we've said enough today with all our words as it is, so we need to bid you farewell for this month. Thanks so much for continuing to watch Art of English and enjoy it, we hope, and learn and grow confident in your English and learning about English writing in particular. We'll be back next month with another book for you that we'll discuss with you, to read with you. But for today, I'm Peter.
I'm Linda. Enjoy reading.
Bye-bye.